Welcome to this incredible channel where history speaks louder than fiction. Before we dive in, kindly hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because every week, we uncover the stories the world tried to forget. Drop in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is as you hear this voice. Let's see who's watching from the farthest corner of the world. Now, close your eyes for a second and imagine Louisiana, 1811, where a storm was about to break loose, not from the sky, but from the hearts of the enslaved. The year was 1811. The place, the German coast of Louisiana. And in just 48 hours, one of the largest slave uprisings in U.S. history would shake the soil beneath the mighty Mississippi River. Hundreds would rise. Plantations would burn. And for the first time, the enslaved dared to believe, freedom could be won. But this was not just a rebellion. It was a message, whispered through generations, that even in chains, the human spirit refuses to die. Before the uprising, before the fire lit the sky over Louisiana, there was silence. A silence that hung heavy over the plantations of the German coast, a silence broken only by the sound of machetes slicing through cane and the muffled cries of the enslaved. They called it the German coast, fertile land along the Mississippi River, stretching from New Orleans northward. To outsiders, it was paradise, rows of sugarcane glowing gold under the sun, grand plantation houses with white columns, laughter echoing from verandas. But to those who worked the fields, it was a prison without walls. A man caught between two worlds. Born on Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti, of mixed race. He was neither fully free nor fully enslaved. A man who had seen freedom, but lived in bondage. He was the driver, the overseer of the enslaved on the Andre plantation. It was his duty to ensure others worked, to carry out orders, to maintain discipline. A position that bought him trust, but cost him peace. Every whip crack that echoed across the fields cut through him too. Because it was his voice that sometimes had to give the command. And each night, as the others slept, he would walk alone to the river's edge. And whisper to the water. One day, this river will carry our freedom. But Louisiana was no ordinary land of slavery. It was a crossroads, a place where ideas flowed as easily as the river. Sailors and traders brought whispers from the Caribbean, whispers of revolution. Whispers of how enslaved people in Haiti rose up, fought back, and won their independence. To many, it was a miracle. To men like Charles, it was proof. At night, when the masters slept, Charles gathered trusted men in the cane fields. Cook, Quamana, Harry, and others. Each had lost something, a wife, a brother, a child, to the lash or the sail. Each had nothing left to fear. They met in secret, beneath the trees, by dim torchlight. Charles would draw lines in the dirt with a stick, showing routes, targets, timing. They would practice hand signals. They would whisper in Creole, French, and broken English, a language of survival. And in their whispers, you could hear both pain and power. We will rise, one would say. They will kill us, another would answer. And Charles would whisper back. Then let them. But we will die as men, not as property. It wasn't hatred that drove them, it was memory. Memory of what freedom once felt like. Many among them were born in Africa or the Caribbean, where they had seen rebellion, seen freedom, seen life without chains. To them, death was not the worst fate. Living forever in silence was. They planned for months, timing every move around the harvest, when the masters were exhausted, and the soldiers far from the plantations. Charles studied Andre's routines, when the guards changed shifts, when the horses were stabled, when the lanterns went out. And he waited. Patiently. Silently. Like a storm gathering on the horizon. To many enslaved people, Charles was more than a man, he was a spark of hope. He walked among them not as a leader barking orders, but as a brother carrying their pain. They looked into his eyes and saw the reflection of something dangerous, belief. Belief that tomorrow could be different. Belief that maybe, just maybe, they could make history rewrite itself. But even in hope, there was fear. For they knew what the price would be. They knew that even a whisper of rebellion could bring death to their families. Still, the whisper grew. It moved from one plantation to the next, like fire spreading through dry cane. And on January 8, 1811, when the moon hung low and the river mist cloaked the land, Charles gave the word. That night, every breath he took felt like his last. Every heartbeat thundered in his chest as he walked toward the Andre house. Toward history itself. He wasn't thinking of vengeance. He was thinking of the unborn, of children who would one day live without chains. He whispered. Let the river remember this night. And as the first torch was lit, the silence of the German coast shattered forever. January 8, 1811. The night the river stopped whispering, and started to roar. On the Andre plantation, the world was asleep. But Charles Deslandes, and those who followed him, were wide awake. They moved like shadows, bare feet on wet grass, blades gleaming in moonlight. There were no uniforms, no guns for most, just courage, machetes, axes, and farming tools turned into weapons of freedom. The first strike came without warning. The Andre house, silent one moment, chaos the next. Shots, screams, the sound of glass shattering. For years, they had been the ones bound and voiceless. But this night, the tables turned. And as the master fell, the message spread like wildfire. It's begun. It's begun. By dawn, the uprising had already crossed the plantations. Men from the neighboring estates joined, Cook, Quamana, Harry, and dozens more. They freed others as they went, swelling their numbers with every step. They moved south toward New Orleans, the city that symbolized power, the beating heart of the slave system. Charles's plan was bold, almost unthinkable. To capture New Orleans itself, free every enslaved person along the river, and ignite a revolution that would sweep the South. Their march was both terrifying and magnificent. Hundreds of men, barefoot, weary, yet filled with fire, walking along the Mississippi levee, their torches burning against the winter fog. They sang songs of freedom in Creole and Kikongo, old languages that the masters could never kill. Some accounts say they marched in military formation. Others say they danced as they went, each step a defiance of everything slavery stood for. But one thing was certain, the German coast had never seen anything like it. Word spread quickly. From plantation to plantation, white families fled in terror. Some hid in the swamps, others ran to New Orleans to raise the alarm. Militias formed, armed men on horseback, muskets ready, driven by fear and vengeance. Still, the rebels pressed on. They were unstoppable for those first hours, their courage greater than their weapons. But the closer they got to New Orleans, the tighter the noose drew around them. Governor Claiborne declared martial law. The local militia, aided by U.S. troops and planters, prepared an ambush. The rebellion, once roaring like fire, was about to face a storm of bullets. At La Branche Plantation, the first clash came. Smoke, screams, confusion. The rebels fought with desperation, but the militia had guns, cannons even. Men fell on both sides. Bodies hit the mud. And the march slowed. Charles Deslandes knew the odds had turned. Still, he didn't run. He shouted above the chaos. Forward. Keep moving. But deep inside, he knew this might be the end of the road. Some rebels scattered into the swamps. Others tried to return to their plantations, pretending they had never joined. But the militia was merciless. They hunted them down, one by one, through cane fields and bayous. Charles was wounded, captured near the river. They said he was barely recognizable, covered in mud, blood, and exhaustion. The same man who had once whispered freedom into the night was now silent, his fate sealed by the very system he tried to destroy. Within days, the rebellion was crushed. Dozens executed without trial. Heads placed on spikes along the levee. Grim warnings to anyone who dared dream of freedom again. But what the masters didn't understand was that rebellion isn't only made of flesh and blood. It's made of memory. And memories cannot be killed. Those who survived whispered the story in secret. In songs, in prayers, in dreams. And though the world tried to bury it, the German Coast Uprising lived on. Not as a failure, but as a prophecy of what was yet to come. The rebellion was over, but the storm had not yet passed. They hunted him for hours, maybe days. The marshes of Louisiana swallowed many, but not Charles. He was found near the riverbank, wounded, exhausted, yet alive. His clothes soaked in blood, his hands trembling, still clutching a broken machete. The men who captured him didn't see a man anymore. They saw a symbol, a nightmare in flesh. The rebellion had to end not just with defeat, but with a warning. They dragged him back to the plantation where it all began. There was no trial. No words of mercy. Only vengeance. Charles Deslandes, the man who had dared to dream of freedom, was executed with cruelty beyond imagination. They shot him. They burned him. They displayed what was left, so that no one would forget what happened to those who dared to rise. Along the Mississippi levee, the heads of rebels were mounted on spikes, stretching for miles. Farmers, mothers, and children were forced to walk past them. A parade of death meant to kill hope itself. But here's the twist. What the planters thought would erase rebellion, instead, planted its seed. Because even in death, Charles spoke louder than ever before. Whispers spread through the quarters, through every sugarcane row, through every plantation. He died free. Those words became prayer. They became power. And though the fire was extinguished that night, its smoke reached far. To Haiti, where freedom had already been won. To Virginia, where Nat Turner would soon rise. To every man, woman, and child who had ever looked at their chains and dreamed. But to those who understood, it was something greater. A prophecy. The 1811 German Coast Uprising was not the end. It was the beginning of a truth America still struggles to face. That freedom can be buried, but never killed. The river still remembers. And if you listen closely enough, on quiet nights along the Mississippi, you might still hear them marching. The night of January 11, 1811, it ended in smoke. The cries that once shook the sugarcane fields were now silenced by gunfire and fire. But what followed was far darker than anyone had imagined. In the aftermath, the militia and U.S. troops descended like a wave of vengeance. Hundreds of enslaved men and women were hunted down across the parishes. Some hid in swamps. Some begged for mercy. Others stood tall, refusing to renounce their freedom, even as death closed in. Those captured were forced into sham trials. Trials that lasted minutes. Verdicts that were already written before the first question was asked. Their bodies were mutilated. Heads placed on pikes along the Mississippi River roads, stretching for miles. A gruesome message to anyone who still dreamed of freedom. For days, travelers passed by those roads in silence. Each head whispering the same word, resistance. And yet, what they tried to kill was not the rebellion, it was the idea of freedom itself. But you can't burn an idea. You can't hang hope. You can't silence history. Because years later, when others rose, in Haiti, in Virginia, across the South, they remembered this uprising. They remembered the men who refused to die quietly. And history began to whisper their names again. More than 2 centuries later, the German Coast Uprising remains one of the largest acts of resistance against slavery in U.S. history. Yet, for years, it was erased, ignored, untaught. But not forgotten. Because stories like this, they return when the world needs to hear them most. They fought not for victory, but for memory. And tonight, you remembered them. If this story moved you, don't leave without subscribing and turning on the notification bell. Because every week, we uncover the forgotten voices of history. The rebels, the dreamers, the silenced. What happened on the German coast wasn't just rebellion. It was a message. A message that the human spirit, no matter how chained, will always rise toward freedom. Drop a comment below. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it their courage? Their sacrifice? Or the way history tried to bury their voices? If you don't want to subscribe, tell me why in the comments. Was it too real? Too heavy? Or maybe, it made you think differently about history itself. The past isn't gone. It's waiting. For someone brave enough to listen.